They say every office has its monsters. Some roar in meetings, some whisper in corridors, and some smile while they quietly take everything that belongs to you. My monster wore a silk tie and Italian shoes that clicked across the marble floor like a metronome counting down to my breaking point. The first time I met Ethan, I actually felt lucky. I was the new junior counsel at a respected downtown law firm, assigned to work under him so he could show me what being a litigator really meant. He was 3 years older, already praised as one of the firm's rising stars. Everyone seemed to orbit around him. He had the kind of practiced confidence that made partners laugh louder and interns nervous. I thought I would learn a lot from him. I was right, but not in the way I expected. The office was a machine that never slept. Phones rang, printers hummed, keyboards clacked like rain against glass. We worked under fluorescent lights that made our faces look pale and tired. The smell of burnt coffee drifted through every hallway. For the first few weeks I kept my head down, buried in research, chasing every comma of perfection so that my work would speak for me. I still believed that hard work was noticed, that talent mattered. Then one morning he called me into his office. He didn't look up as I entered. He was flipping through the pages of my first legal opinion, eyes scanning too quickly to actually read. The blinds behind him threw long bars of light across his desk. I stood there, heart pounding, waiting for feedback. He finally set the paper down and said flatly, "This opinion is shit." The words landed like a slap. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him right. "I'm sorry, what exactly is wrong with it?" "Not what I asked for," he said without looking at me. He picked up a pen, clicked it twice, and started making random marks on the page. But I knew it was what he asked for. I had followed the memo he sent me word for word. That night I went back to my computer and checked the original instructions. Every line matched. Every argument, every citation. My stomach twisted as the realization formed. He wasn't criticizing me because I failed. He was criticizing me because he planned to take it. The next day my opinion appeared on a partner's desk, printed fresh, with his name on the cover page instead of mine. That was the first theft. At first I told myself it was an accident. Maybe he forgot to include my name. Maybe this was just how the system worked. But when my weekly docket report came in, I saw that several of my research entries had been deleted. Hours of billable time erased, as if I had done nothing. That was when anger began to harden inside me. I went to see the senior partner in charge of our team, Mr. Lasker. He was a man carved out of habit and cigar smoke. His office smelled of leather and old paper. I explained everything. The deleted hours, the missing credit, the stolen memos. He listened without expression, then leaned back and said, "You'll just have to work harder. Or smarter." That was it. No investigation, no concern, just dismissal. I walked out feeling smaller than ever. The walls of the hallway seemed to close in. In that moment I realized that in this firm, hierarchy mattered more than honesty. Ethan came from money. He wore bespoke suits and drove a car that cost more than my student loans. I was nobody. To the partners, he looked like their reflection. I was just another replaceable name on a long list of junior associates trying not to drown. Weeks turned into months. Ethan kept taking. Every time he handed in one of my memos under his name, he grew bolder. He started assigning me meaningless busy work, then mocking me for not producing enough value. When I worked late, he took the credit for my dedication. When I made an argument that impressed a client, he interrupted and finished my sentence like it was his idea all along. He smiled while doing it, always smiling. The more I tried to fight back, the more invisible I became. Once, I confronted him about deleting my docket hours. He laughed and said, "Relax, kid. It's called teamwork. You'll understand one day." I went home that night shaking. My small apartment felt colder than usual. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was what adulthood was supposed to be. Silent injustice and forced smiles. Every day I came into the office and played my part. I said good morning. I thanked him for feedback I didn't need. I swallowed my pride and kept producing perfect work that he continued to steal. But deep down, something was changing. The anger stopped burning hot. It cooled into something sharper, quieter, more dangerous. I started to notice things I hadn't before. Ethan's nervous habits. For one, he fidgeted during meetings, tapped his pen when asked a direct question, avoided eye contact when the conversation turned technical. The man everyone thought was brilliant was actually terrified of being exposed. He relied on people like me to make him look competent. Without our work, he was hollow. I began keeping copies of everything I wrote. Every draft, every email, every time-stamped document saved to a private drive. It was my quiet insurance policy. But I didn't just want proof. Proof would only get me a sorry, and maybe a new supervisor. I wanted something else. I wanted him to feel what it was like to be powerless. One Friday, after another 12-hour day, I found myself alone in the office. The city lights blinked outside like distant stars. My reflection in the window looked older than it should. I realized I couldn't keep doing this. I was exhausted, humiliated, and yet, somewhere inside me, a strange calm was forming. If he wanted to play dirty, I could play smarter. The next morning I arrived early, pretending to be cheerful. I made coffee for both of us and dropped by his office. "Rough week," I said, trying to sound casual. He grinned, thinking I was looking for approval. "That's how you earn your stripes, kid." I nodded, pretending to agree, but inside I was already building something. Not revenge yet. Not exactly. A framework. I began watching how assignments moved through the firm. Which partners gave instructions, who typed the memos, what the paper looked like, how the signatures were formatted. Every detail mattered. I noticed that the older partners still preferred typewritten memos instead of email. They trusted paper, not screens. And their assistants kept old typewriters in a side office for that very reason. That was when an idea began to glow faintly in the back of my mind. Still, I needed time. For now, I kept playing the role of the obedient junior. I laughed at Ethan's jokes. I handed him fresh research notes. I let him believe I was beaten. He enjoyed that belief too much to question it. But when I sat alone at my desk at night, surrounded by silence and the distant hum of the city, I began to write. Not legal opinions. Plans. Scenarios. Little sketches of justice that no one would ever see until the right moment. I imagined the day his arrogance would finally corner him. I pictured his expression when the partners he idolized realized he was a fraud. That image became my fuel. By early December, the tension in the office was a living thing. Everyone was tired, chasing year-end quotas. Ethan was bragging about how many billable hours he had logged. I smiled every time I heard him. Most of those hours were mine. Christmas was coming, and the partners were preparing to leave for their vacations. Lasker was old-fashioned, traveling with his wife to Europe and unreachable for weeks. Ethan, of course, was planning a ski trip to Aspen. He mentioned it constantly, dropping the word chalet like a medal. I listened, nodded, and waited. The night before the holidays officially began, the office emptied early. I stayed behind, pretending to finish paperwork. When the last footsteps faded and the building lights dimmed, I walked to the side office where the old typewriters sat. The smell of ink and dust filled the air. I ran my fingers across the keys and smiled. I didn't know the full plan yet, but I knew this was where it would start. That night, as snow began to fall outside the tall windows, I made myself a quiet promise. I would give Ethan a Christmas gift he would never forget. Not one wrapped in ribbon or gold paper, but in legal letterhead and false authority. Something that would look exactly like success until it destroyed him from the inside. The foundation was laid. All I needed now was the right moment, and the courage to press the keys that would change everything. When the system fails you long enough, something inside you shifts. At first, it is quiet. Just a tired sigh that lives somewhere between your ribs. But over time, it hardens into something sharper. It becomes focus. That was what happened to me after that first winter at the firm. I stopped waiting for fairness. I stopped hoping someone else would save me. And in that silence, I began to plan. The weeks before Christmas were always chaos. Associates ran through the halls clutching folders. Phones rang nonstop. The partners barked orders from behind half-closed doors. It was the kind of exhaustion that turned even seasoned lawyers into ghosts. Most of the juniors were too tired to notice anything beyond their next deadline. But I was watching everything, every small detail that could become part of the trap I was quietly building. Ethan was still thriving, at least on the surface. He loved to talk about how crazy busy he was, how the partners were trusting him with major files. He had started wearing gold cufflinks to match the expensive watch he bought himself after his last bonus. Whenever he caught his reflection in the glass walls of the conference room, he smiled at it like an old friend. To everyone else, he was untouchable. But to me, he was starting to look hollow. I saw how he flinched when asked direct questions about his cases. I saw how he stalled in meetings, repeating phrases he barely understood. He had built his confidence on stolen words, and now every lie he told carried the risk of collapse. By mid-December, I was staying later than ever, telling myself I was catching up on work. In truth, I was rehearsing. I was testing how the office felt when it was empty, how the locks sounded when the last person left, how long the security lights took to dim. It was almost peaceful after midnight. The air was cool, the floor quiet except for the hum of the heater. I started to memorize the rhythm of it all, like a stage actor practicing in the dark before the play begins. But before I could act, I had to survive another humiliation. It happened one Friday night, right before the partners left for their holidays. Ethan dumped a new research assignment on my desk just before I packed up. "Need this by Monday," he said without even looking at me. It was a 40-page request about procedural motions in maritime law, completely unrelated to any file we were working on. "Monday?" I asked, staring at the stack of papers. He smiled. "It's not optional." I stayed the entire weekend. The city outside was wrapped in frost. My apartment felt smaller than ever. My eyes burned as I flipped through case law, page after page, trying to finish something that made no sense. I didn't even realize I had dozed off until my phone buzzed Monday morning. When I arrived, the office was already buzzing with pre-holiday chatter. Ethan was in the hallway, holding a coffee cup and talking loudly about his upcoming meeting. He was using the same phrases from my draft. The same wording. My name was nowhere on the document. Again. That was it. The line had been crossed too many times. That night, as the snow began to fall, I sat at my desk and opened his digital folder. The firm's internal network wasn't exactly Fort Knox. Each associate had a personal drive that was supposed to be private, but the permissions were sloppy. It took less than a minute to find his password cached in the system. I hesitated for a moment, then clicked. There it was. Dozens of memos, case analyses, opinion drafts. And as I scrolled through them, I felt a bitter laugh catch in my throat. Half of them were mine. Not just similar, but identical. My phrasing, my formatting, even the typos. He hadn't even bothered to edit most of it. I stared at the screen for a long time. I could have printed them all out, taken them straight to Lasker, and watched Ethan burn immediately. But that would have been too easy. Too clean. He would just deny it, say it was collaboration, call it miscommunication. He might even survive it. No. I didn't want him gone quietly. I wanted him seen. I wanted him exposed in the most public, undeniable way possible. So I waited. The next week was slow. Partners were gone. Only a few associates were left, tying up loose ends before the holidays. Ethan strutted around like he owned the place. He wore a new tie every day, each more ridiculous than the last, as if trying to remind everyone how successful he was. One afternoon, he came into my cubicle. "You got plans for Christmas?" he asked. "Just family stuff," I said. "Nice. I'll be in Aspen. Chalet private chef. You know how it is." He grinned. "Try not to blow up the office while I'm gone." He laughed at his own joke and walked away. I watched him go, my jaw tight. When the last Friday before Christmas arrived, the office emptied early. Most people had already left. Ethan stayed behind until 5, pretending to finish some file. I watched from my desk as he locked his drawer, grabbed his coat, and disappeared into the elevator. His reflection in the mirrored doors was the last thing I saw before the hallway fell silent. I waited 15 minutes. Then I stood up. The typewriter was kept in a small side office near the records room. The smell of old paper and ink greeted me when I opened the door. I turned on the small lamp by the window and sat down in front of it. The keys were cool to the touch. I had already prepared notes for the fake assignment, carefully modeled after the way Mr. Lasker worded his memos. He was predictable in that sense. He always used certain phrases, the same formal style. I had seen hundreds of his notes over the months. I rolled in the cream-colored legal letterhead, adjusted the margins, and started typing. The sound of the keys echoed softly. The memo read like any other directive from a senior partner. It instructed Ethan to conduct immediate, comprehensive research on the constitutional relationship between admiralty law and the common law system. It emphasized urgency. It even added a line at the bottom. Partner requires findings upon return from holiday. I smiled as I reread it. It was perfect. Technical enough to sound real, but broad enough to be meaningless. A trap disguised as an opportunity. I folded the paper, placed it neatly into an envelope, and typed Ethan's name on the front. Then I left it right in the center of his desk, positioned so it would be the first thing he saw when he returned. The next morning, while the city woke up to the sound of church bells and snow plows, Ethan walked into the office to grab a few last-minute things before his trip. I made sure to be there too, pretending to be finishing some leftover work. I watched him from behind my computer screen as he noticed the memo. He frowned, then opened it. His expression shifted from confusion to pride in seconds. He read the signature at the bottom, the fake initials, the familiar letterhead. Then he smirked. A few minutes later, he came to my desk, memo in hand. "Big job from Lasker," he said. "I need you to handle this while I'm gone. Apparently it's urgent." I pretended to groan. "But this looks massive. It'll take days." "Then get started," he said. "Consider it your Christmas gift." He laughed, tossed the memo onto my keyboard, and left. I waited until the elevator doors closed, then picked up the paper. My heart was racing, but not from fear. It was from satisfaction. Everything had gone exactly as planned. That night, I went home, pulled an old floppy disk from a drawer, and smiled. It contained a research paper I wrote years ago in law school. Coincidentally, it covered the same obscure topic mentioned in the memo. I opened it, made a few edits, and spent the next few hours padding it with citations and case law to make it look new. It would be the most convincing piece of useless work the firm had ever seen. When I finished, I leaned back in my chair and laughed quietly. For once, the noise inside me had stopped. I printed the final draft 2 days later, bound it neatly, and placed it in my drawer. While Ethan was drinking champagne in Aspen, I was building the rope he would hang himself with. When the holidays ended, he would come back to the office expecting glory. Instead, he would walk straight into the fire he thought he controlled. I couldn't wait to watch. When Ethan returned from his luxurious vacation, he would find my finished memo waiting. Heavy, detailed, and utterly useless. And in his eagerness to impress, he would deliver it straight to the one man who could destroy him. The morning Ethan returned felt like the prelude before a thunderstorm. The office smelled of reheated coffee and stale paper. People moved through the space with the slow, brittle energy of anyone coming back from a long vacation and pretending everything was the same. Ethan walked in with a grin so wide it looked rehearsed. His cheeks had color from the mountain air. He carried a small gift bag for a colleague and a tan that made him look more confident than usual. He dropped his coat in the locker room, smoothed his suit, and strolled down the corridor like a man who owned every corner of the building. He did not know that I had spent the last 10 days preparing the ammunition that would expose him. He did not know that his smugness would be the exact tool that finished him. He did not know, in short, how fragile he really was. For a full day he basked in praise. Partners asked about his trip, associates laughed at his stories, and someone brought in pastries. He accepted compliments with the practiced modesty of a man who has learned how to collect applause without earning it. At midday he stopped by my desk. "How did you manage that memo?" he asked, tapping the folder he had been carrying since he arrived. "Lasker really threw a monster at you." Good work. He said it like a compliment, like I had done him a favor by taking on something so tedious. I smiled and nodded, keeping my face neutral. Inside, every beat of my heart hit like a small, deliberate drum. I had prepared for this moment with surgical care. When I forged the memo, I ensured it looked exactly like something Lasker would produce. I copied the paper texture, the faded imprint of the old typeface, the little punctuation habits he left when he wrote his initials. I even made sure the assignment was long enough to be maddening. The subject of the memo was obscure enough to be ignored by anyone who had not spent years studying it. That obscurity was part of the trap. During the days Ethan was gone, I had taken the old drafts I wrote in law school and resurrected them. I updated citations, added contemporary cases, and wrapped it all in an appearance of urgency and weight. I created an impression of labor so vast that anyone would believe it required months. I knew that the partner would judge the effort not by the sense of the content but by the appearance of effort. That is how prestige works in law. When partners see a thick memo with heavy citations, they equate it with competence. Now the thick memo sat in Ethan's hands, and he assumed it was his victory. He did not check the metadata. He did not think to ask whether the work had a single author inside the firm. He assumed. Assumption is a good thing for cowards. That afternoon Lasker called an impromptu review meeting. His voice came through the speakers like an old bell. Partners filtered into the conference room with papers under their arms. Ethan took his place at the head of the table, chest puffed out. He placed the memo in front of him like a trophy. When Lasker opened the pages, his face contorted in a way I had not expected. He held the memo by one corner, peering as if the paper might suddenly reveal some hidden defect. His lips tightened. He read. He read some more. The room hummed with polite silence. Then his voice rose. "What is this?" he asked coldly. His eyes locked on Ethan. The tension in the room became an animal that could be felt. Ethan smiled for a heartbeat, then stammered. He tried to explain the sources, the approach, the supposed nights spent researching. His story was tidy but thin. Partners exchanged glances that said more than words. Lasker closed the memo and put it down with a firmness that suggested he felt insulted and amused at the same time. "Ethan," Lasker said slowly, "whose name is on that memo?" Ethan fumbled. "It was assigned internally. I thought I was handling it." "Assigned by whom?" Lasker asked. "Because this reads like something I would never ask for. This reads like something assembled out of an old student paper then rebranded." A wave of disbelief moved across the room. The partners began to interrogate Ethan with the casual cruelty of men who have little patience for fraud. Questions came fast. Who signed off on it? Which files did you consult? Where did you spend your time billing for the hours this would have required? Ethan's answers frayed. He shifted in his seat like someone whose suit suddenly felt much too tight. The more he spoke, the smaller he became. He had practiced the art of looking confident, but he had never practiced the art of defense. Then Lasker asked the question that mattered most. "Do you have the original working files?" Ethan nodded and reached into his bag. He produced a disk and a folder and then handed them over with a flourish. He wanted to show that he had been thorough. He wanted to prove he had been the one who worked. His hands trembled just enough to be telling. Lasker opened the digital files and laid them next to the memorandum. He scanned the timestamps. His face hardened. He turned toward me and said in a voice that carried like a verdict, "Call in the junior who worked on this while I was away." People looked at me. The chairs squeaked as heads turned. I walked into that room and felt like I was stepping into a chamber of witnesses. My pulse was steady, but the air in the room felt too thin to breathe. Lasker asked me to talk him through the work. I explained calmly and in detail the research I had done, the drafts I had written, the sources I had traced. I watched Ethan as I spoke. He was sweating under his immaculate shirt. He mouthed nothing, but his mouth moved like someone rehearsing apologies he had never had to give. When I finished, I handed Lasker a copy of the research disk I had used. He compared the files. For every paragraph he ran his finger along the paper and then along the electronic file. The match was undeniable. He looked up at Ethan with an expression I will never forget. It was a cocktail of disappointment and contempt. Ethan tried rationalizing things with a lawyer's cadence, but that cadence evaporated when the social structures that had protected him failed to respond. It turned out he had been sloppy in a way that arrogance never admits. He had not scrubbed the metadata or removed the old notations. He had left a note in a margin that linked to my student paper by name. In the OfficeNet files there were drafts with my username and timestamps from late nights I had logged while researching. In a moment, the illusion of competence collapsed into a pile of easily traceable breadcrumbs. The partners did not throw him out that day, but they did something worse from his perspective. They stripped the aura. They made him ordinary in a room full of people who worshipped pretense. They ordered a formal review. They asked him to produce a written explanation and assigned a senior partner to audit his files. The humiliation was surgical. He sat there with the blush of a man exposed, but the true victory was not the blush. It was the removal of his shield. In the days that followed, the office felt like the place after a storm when the power is out and people shuffle to find candles. Ethan's gait changed. His jokes died on his lips. He stopped wearing the flashier ties. When he walked past my desk now, he did not bother to mention Aspen or the chalet. Instead, he kept his head down and pretended not to notice that everyone was looking. I did not feel the rush of triumph I had expected. There was a deep, complicated satisfaction, but it was mixed with a strange emptiness. Part of me had expected catharsis to be louder, more dramatic. Instead, it was a slow settling in the chest, like the first sip of a bitter tea that warms you in a different way. People began to ask me questions in neutral tones they had not used before. Partners requested copies of my work for their own files. A junior who had once avoided my eye now smiled more freely. Lasker called me into his office and, in private, said the words I had longed to hear in a way that made them strange. He thanked me for my integrity and said he would ensure no one took credit for my work again. His voice carried the authority of a man who had finally seen something he had been blind to. But the system that had allowed Ethan to thrive did not change overnight. Policies were adjusted. Permissions were tightened. People were warned to be more careful with file ownership. Ethan stayed on, but not because he was redeemed. He stayed because the firm is a small town where the economy of reputation is slow to be replaced by moral clarity. He would continue to work, but without the same freedom to pretend. That night, after the partners left and the office hummed with the thin light of late printers, I sat alone and tried to understand what I had done. I had engineered a collapse not through violence or vindictive spectacle, but through patience, through careful observation, and through a willingness to use the very language of the firm against someone who had weaponized it. I had wanted him to feel powerless. He felt that now, in ways I could not have imagined when I first decided on the plan. He avoided elevators that had mirrors. He stopped checking his reflection in windows. He kept his hands in his pockets and spoke less. He had been reduced from a man who took what he wanted to someone who had to answer for his actions. In the quiet that followed, I realized revenge had not made the world more just. It had merely rearranged it so that the man who thought himself untouchable recognized his own fragility. That was something, but it was also a warning. The methods I used relied on access to weak systems and human errors. If I had been found out earlier, I could have been fired, or worse. I had risked everything for a sense of balance. I slept that night with a careful, watchful peace. The office felt a little less like a machine and a little more like a place where truth could matter. The next morning I arrived early as always, and when Ethan walked by my desk he did not meet my gaze. He had lost something and I had gained something else. It was not perfect. It was not clean. It felt, in its own way, like the hard edge of finally being seen. As the sun rose on another ordinary day full of files and coffee, I understood that the case was never just about one memo. It was about reclaiming agency in a world that tried to render me invisible. It was about proving that skill and integrity mattered enough to build a slow trap and wait for it to spring. And even as I told myself that, a small voice in the back of my head whispered a caution. Power used for retribution is a double-edged thing. I had used it and I had been changed by it. I had crossed a line into action that I had once thought only appeared in the novels and the movies. I wondered if I would be the same man when the dust settled. The answer would come in time. For now the firm was quieter. Ethan was diminished. I had my hours restored and my name back on the memos that mattered. The sparks of victory glowed but did not warm the way I expected. The clock on the wall ticked like any other day. Outside the city moved indifferent and fast. Inside the office something had shifted under the fabric of the ordinary. I sat down, opened a fresh document, and got back to work. Now the final act would begin. The consequences would ripple in ways I could not anticipate. There would be reactions, resentments, and perhaps even regret. But those were things for tomorrow. For now, I had a quiet cup of coffee, the sun through the blinds, and the knowledge that one carefully forged memo had altered the course of more than one life. When truth finally bursts into the open, it does not arrive with drums or applause. It arrives quietly, like a light turning on in a room that has been dark for too long. After the confrontation in the conference room, the office atmosphere changed in subtle but undeniable ways. Conversations stopped when Ethan entered a hallway. Partners no longer called his name in meetings. Secretaries exchanged looks when his footsteps echoed down the marble floor. His reputation, once polished to a shine, began to rust in real time. The official story was simple. A misunderstanding. A lapse in supervision. A clerical confusion that led to duplicated work. No one said the word plagiarism out loud, but it floated in the air like smoke that refused to clear. The partners preferred quiet damage control. They did not want gossip spilling beyond the walls. But silence inside an office is never empty. It carries whispers from desk to desk, and those whispers become the real verdict. I returned to my routine. I logged my hours carefully, sent my memos directly to Lasker, and avoided unnecessary conversation. On the surface, I looked unchanged, but inside I felt a strange calm. For the first time since joining the firm, my work was safe under my own name. Every time I saw my initials printed on a report, I felt a flicker of pride that no one could take away. Ethan tried to maintain his old posture for a while. He straightened his tie, spoke too loudly in the break room, tried to laugh with the others. But it was forced, brittle. The confidence he used to wear like armor had turned into a costume he could not remove. Eventually, even he realized that pretending only made it worse. He started coming in late, leaving early, and keeping his office door half closed. One afternoon, I overheard him arguing with Lasker behind that door. The tone was low but sharp. Words like responsibility, oversight, and damaged trust filtered through the wall. When the door finally opened, Ethan walked out looking smaller, his shoulders hunched, his hands buried deep in his pockets. He did not notice me sitting nearby. He went straight to the elevators and disappeared for the rest of the day. After that, his decline accelerated. Files were reassigned. Meetings went on without him. His name stopped appearing on internal memos. The firm had a way of isolating those who lost favor. It was not open cruelty. It was indifference, which somehow hurt more. No one fired him. They simply stopped seeing him. Weeks passed. The winter ice melted outside. Inside, Ethan's cubicle stayed cold. He barely spoke to anyone except his secretary. I sometimes caught glimpses of him staring at the office windows, expression blank, as if watching the reflection of his own downfall. Then one morning he was gone. His office was empty except for a few folders and a half-dead plant. The cleaning staff removed the nameplate from his door by lunchtime. The partners released a brief memo thanking him for his contributions and wishing him success in his future endeavors. No one believed the politeness of those words. The day he left, I walked past his vacant office. The blinds were open, letting in gray light. On his desk sat a single item he had forgotten, a gold tie pin. I picked it up and turned it in my hand. It was heavy, expensive, and meaningless. I placed it back exactly where I found it and walked away. For a while after he left, the firm felt different. People seemed to exhale collectively, as if the tension had finally broken. Work went on as always, but the rhythm was gentler. Lasker began checking in with the juniors more often. He asked for direct submissions and gave small but genuine compliments. It was as though the entire place had learned a quiet lesson about credit and trust. Yet in private moments, I wondered what exactly I had gained. I had outsmarted a man who deserved it, but I had also crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. I had forged a memo, manipulated systems, and orchestrated humiliation. I told myself it was justified, that it was self-defense in a world that rewarded exploitation. Still, part of me questioned whether justice achieved through deceit could ever feel clean. There were nights when I dreamed of that moment in the conference room. In those dreams, Lasker's voice echoed again, asking, "Who wrote this?" Sometimes I woke up before answering. Other times I heard my own voice admitting everything, and the room dissolved into silence. Those dreams reminded me that victory always comes with shadows. Spring arrived. The city thawed, and the firm began hiring new associates. I mentored one of them, a young lawyer who reminded me of myself before the anger hardened. He was bright, nervous, and eager to prove himself. One evening he asked me, "How do you deal with people taking credit for your work?" I paused before answering. "Keep your records," I said. "Be patient. The truth has a strange way of surfacing when you least expect it." He nodded, grateful for the advice he did not fully understand. Months later, I was called into Lasker's office again. He told me I was being moved to a higher profile case, one that would put my name on client documents. He said I had shown diligence and judgment under pressure. He used the word, trustworthy. That single word, after everything that had happened, hit me harder than praise. I thanked him and left his office with a small smile. That night, walking home through the city streets, I passed a cafe with tall windows. Inside, sitting alone with a cup of coffee and no tie, was Ethan. His hair was shorter, his face thinner. He was staring out at the street, but not at anything in particular. For a second, our eyes met through the glass. He did not look angry. He looked tired, almost relieved. He gave a small nod, one that could have meant anything. Maybe acknowledgement. Maybe apology. Maybe nothing at all. I returned the nod and kept walking. Neither of us needed words. The story between us had already been written, and both of us knew how it ended. Years have passed since then. I eventually left the firm for another position. A better one. Sometimes, when I find myself mentoring young associates, I tell them about integrity without giving names. I tell them that the law punishes lies in theory but tolerates them in practice, so it is up to each person to decide what they can live with. I never mention the forged memo. That secret remains between me and the quiet hum of that old typewriter. Every now and then, I still think about that night when I sat under the dim lamp and pressed those keys. The rhythm of the typewriter was steady, almost meditative. It felt like I was rewriting the balance of the universe, one click at a time. Looking back, I realize it was less about revenge and more about reclaiming control. I had been erased, and I needed to exist again. The memo was my declaration that I refused to vanish. Was it moral? Probably not. Was it satisfying? Absolutely. If there is one thing I learned, it is that justice is rarely clean. Sometimes it hides inside clever acts and imperfect victories. Sometimes it wears the face of a man smiling quietly in his cubicle while another man's arrogance burns itself out. Whenever life gets difficult now, I think back to that time. To the fear, the anger, and finally the calm. I remember that you can survive corruption without becoming part of it, but you may have to bend the rules to do it. In the end, the forged memo was not just a trick. It was a mirror. It showed everyone what they were, and it showed me who I could become when pushed to the edge. That memory still brings a small, private smile. Not of pride exactly, but of recognition. The kind of smile you wear when you know you have seen the system from the inside and managed, somehow, to walk away whole. The lesson was simple but difficult. Some people mistake kindness for weakness, and integrity for naivety. But there comes a point when silence stops being virtuous. Sometimes, standing up for yourself means stepping outside the lines drawn by those who abuse them. Ethan lost his illusion of power. I gained the ability to believe in mine. The office went on, the city kept moving, and justice, imperfect as it was, found its balance in the quietest way possible. If you have ever been underestimated, if someone ever tried to erase your work or silence your effort, remember this story. Keep your proof, trust your patience, and never let arrogance convince you that you are powerless. And if you enjoyed this story of quiet justice, subscribe for more tales where truth finds its way back, one way or another.